All right, this is your Gaza War sit rep, day 181. No end in sight. In fact, there was another message from the political bureau, Osama Hamdan from Hamas, who said Israel keeps presenting us identical proposals that we've already rejected and don't meet our 4 central demands. So no negotiated ending to the fighting appears to be on the horizon. I've got Tarek here. We're going to do a medical sit rep today, as you may know from the title of the video. But before that, let me just give you some sense of the news. So Israel claims they foiled an assassination attempt on Israeli politician Itamar Ben-Gvir. They arrested 11 people, claiming that there was a big plot to assassinate this prominent politician with a rocket-propelled grenade, no less. Israeli embassies are on high alert. They've recalled reservists, opened shelters, spoofed GPS on their phones. Tarek is very tech savvy. Maybe we'll get into some of that GPS spoofing a little bit later. It's a funny situation because they're tense. They committed the assassination in Damascus of these Iranian military figures, and they're the ones who are nervous now. They're in a state of high alert and moving things around and waiting for Iran to strike back. Gaza. So Gaza, there's fighting in Deir el-Balah, which is actually not far from where the World Central Kitchen people were killed the other day. And it seems like, if we can make the analogy to the hospital attacks, Israelis troops are trying to blow up buildings, and the resistance is attacking them as they try to blow up buildings. So this is another case of them giving up military assets for the sake of blowing up civilian infrastructure and getting killed in the process, losing armor in the process. As well, there are a big day of rocket attacks from Gaza on Ashkelon, Sderot, and Netivot are all reports. There are protests again in Jordan for the 13th day in a row. There's also protests in Egypt. I mentioned that. I mentioned Jordan yesterday, but I missed Egypt. There were also big demonstrations in Egypt yesterday, and they don't mention the president of Egypt, Sisi. But they're criticizing his advisors, so they're getting closer and closer to saying it openly. I saw a U.S. story about how Sisi, the president of Egypt, actually moved the election. It was going to be in 2023, and now it was going to be in 2024, but he moved it up to November 2023. There were arrests today of people participating in the demonstrations yesterday, so they're already on top of it. Then speeches-wise, there was a speech from Abu Hamza of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, following on yesterday's speeches, very much in the similar kind of theme. In the West Bank, there's been lots more fighting in Jenin. There was another explosive device in Nablus. And in Lebanon, just continuous fighting, continuous attacks, missile attacks. Metula and many other targets were hit today. The other major humanitarian thing before we get into the medical sitrep is that I saw a report that Israel is opening Erez, which is the northern crossing, which has been closed as far as I know since October 7th, and also allowing more trucks to enter from the other crossing in the south. So I don't know why. Maybe presumably it has something to do with the debacle with assassinating World Central Kitchen people. But who knows what's going on there. But it does seem like maybe they're trying to make up for that miscalculation somehow, or something else. Maybe there's some other logic at work. All right, so with all of that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Tarek. You guys know Tarek, I'm sure. And Tarek is going to do a medical sit rep. We've been doing military sit reps, but there's a whole side to this situation that Tarek knows really, really well. So I'm going to actually more or less hand it over to you, Tarek, to take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Justin. And maybe a good way to do this, because I'm so immersed in this information, is, ask clarifying questions, especially when I get a little bit too deep into things. Basically, I kind of wanted to just walk through like what exactly the health situation looks like. Obviously, it's bad, but there are lots of really interesting adaptations that are happening. And lots of those adaptations are resulting in some very cool stuff happening on the Palestinian side. Um, and since you mentioned the GPS spoofing, I'll just very quickly touch on that as well. So really the biggest news within our world today is that there's the idea that now we're going to be able to access for humanitarian purposes, especially medical missions, through Cyprus and through Erez. So Cyprus kind of came online. They're telling us that we're going to be able to access Israel through Cyprus as well to get missions in, which is pretty significant for some of us, especially because lots of the more senior people who are involved in the medical response haven't been able to go into Gaza because they have problems with Egypt. So that's something that will hopefully be resolved through the Cyprus or even through the Erez pathway. So in terms of healthcare, here I'll see if we can do some sharing. Basically, we sort of generate collectively all of these reports. They're published by what's called the health cluster. And every couple of weeks, there's a report which is delayed by a little bit. So they take time to generate. I'll show you one right now to give you an idea.
Wait, are you trying to share already, or
I will
because I
share in
don't?
a moment. Yeah,
Okay. I don't see anything yet. That's all.
yeah, I'll be sharing right now. So basically here, if you can you see the report now?
Yep.
All right. So essentially, when we're talking about the various attacks that are going on, people have some vague understanding that, there have been lots of attacks. And I want to sort of present these very well documented attacks that have happened. 410 health attacks resulting in 685 people killed in these attacks. This in no way reflects what's been going on in Shifa recently. These numbers would be slated to jump significantly as a result of the action in Shifa. In fact, the action in Shifa is so extraordinary, I actually don't really know that they're going to know how to introduce it into these data sets.
I know these are being shortened to health attacks, but I just want to clarify, we're talking about Israeli military attacks on Palestinian health facilities.
Yeah,
Just
correct.
like abbreviating it to a health attack, you kind of lose maybe the agency of that. Just want to
Yes, thank
just
you.
wanted to put that back in there. That's all.
Thank you for that. So essentially, the way that kind of Gaza is divided out in terms of these zones is that there are 4 zones, plus Rafah is a zone onto its own because of the way in which Rafah has been used by the Israelis. Generally, we divide Gaza into 3 health zones: the north, the middle, and then the south, with Gaza more or less kind of being on its own. Or sorry, 4 zones with Gaza being on its own. But here you can kind of see that they've added a 5th zone, which is for Rafah. So in all of these areas, there have been attacks. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving as well, but in all of these areas, there have been significant attacks. In all of these areas, you can see that almost all the hospitals are either totally not functioning or severely damaged. And of course, the other thing that people don't think about, people are thinking about the hospitals, which deliver acute care by and large. However, there's an entire other medical system, which is a medical system of primary care. People are dying because they don't have their diabetes medication. People are dying because they don't have um, medication related to high blood pressure. They don't have their usual thyroid medication, or they don't have their psychiatric medication. Imagine being somebody who is prone to breaks with reality, not having your medication and being in this scenario. It's an incredibly dangerous situation. So this is something that is quite important to know. In terms of the functionality of the system, basically we have this new concept of medical points and the concept of field hospitals. Field hospitals are usually known, but field hospitals aren't usually created for the reasons that they're created in Gaza. So they've taken on a whole new personality that we're not really used to. usually a field hospital is constructed because it's not close to another hospital, or because there's some other extraordinary situation, not because the Israelis have besieged and created sand berms so you can't get in. I mean, it's just not the way we think about field hospitals in like the medical world. However, there have been lots of medical points, many of which are associated with shelters. Primary healthcare facilities are obviously becoming more important as there's less and less care. So when people, for example, are part of a blast injury, very often there's a lot of shrapnel on their body or many burns. And therefore they have to go get care for literally months at a time afterwards. That's not happening in hospitals, even though in Canada it would. That's happening in medical points and in primary healthcare facilities. The other thing that we should be talking about is how the medical system, I'm talking about the international led medical system, because it used to be that the medical system in Gaza was led locally, but now that it's led internationally, it really does represent a huge fall. So you can see here as we go on that we are failing to deliver medical care. And we are absolutely failing to deliver medical care. We're not reaching as many people. The numbers have very quickly fallen off of a cliff, especially as the Israelis have stepped up their attacks. The high here really was the first week of January, and then ever since then, it's just been going more or less down. And this year, not really all that important. People can look at the reports for themselves if they want, but it just kind of talks about how people are having their aid delivered. And so if you can see in terms of the supplies, obviously a lot of people are bringing in supplies related to medical care, but by far the biggest is the World Health Organization. We can say the United Nations. And in terms of who implements care, by far the largest group implementing care is UNRWA. And so people.
Sorry, Tarek, something happened to your sound. Yeah, you're
What
back.
to make of that?
You're
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
I was just saying, so people think of groups like ours, GLIA, or organizations that they hear about in the news as being the main implementing partners, the main groups doing the medical work. That's not true. UNRWA does 70% of the implementation in terms of patients seen, and that's down from what it usually is, but that's still pretty significant. And then what else we do is a lot of disease surveillance. So, for example, for us at GLIA, we present all of this data to the World Health Organization based on what the delegates are seeing, and they compile these reports. And as you can see, the numbers are horrific. You're talking about tons of people who are suffering with basically everything. This one here, acute jaundice, is worth looking at because that's a good reflection of how poor the water is, along with bloody diarrhea. And meningitis is another one. Really, meningitis is a function of severe overcrowding, bad conditions, poor healthcare. Meningitis is devastating as a disease, especially when it's not caught early and when there was so little antibiotics available. I mean, it's just devastating. The skin diseases are a good reflection of sanitation, so bad water, bad access to usual care of clothes and of bodies. So we can kind of see that the situation is getting worse. Port kind of gets into a few more details, but not all that significant. So
Can I ask some questions?
yeah, of course.
So organizationally, what is the Gaza Health Cluster?
The health cluster is essentially the collection of non-governmental organizations that are coming together to cluster around health. There are the different clusters, health being one, WASH being another one, which is water, sanitation, hygiene. I forget what the A is. I think it might be and. And then there's other ones too, like food assistance is its own cluster. And there's a few of these other sorts of setups. So yeah, so
I have two more, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
The numbers were relatively higher of people served in January and February, and then they got much lower in March.
Yeah. So basically, that's the transition from local care to international care. Internationals were allowed starting the end of December. So
Okay.
December 25th was the first mission that got in. I think it was Palestinian American Bridge. Then after that, other international organizations started to get in. So there was a bit of a peak there. But that's on the background of everything deteriorating, the Israelis basically destroying medical infrastructure. And if ever you wanted to talk about a band-aid, a bunch of doctors who don't know the language, who don't know the culture, who don't know the medical situation, coming in from outside for 2 weeks at a time. I mean, it's obviously it's the best we have. We're doing what we can with it, but it's a terrible substitute. And so you see that little bump because that's when we started pouring in. But there was no way to stop what was happening because as you know, it's not like an earthquake happened and then you're rebuilding. It's a continuous loss of capacity. Um, to call it a loss of capacity, I guess you called me out on the Asian
Agency
Sea,
again.
right?
It's a
Yeah,
it's a destruction. It's a
yeah,
military campaign of destruction against the Palestinian
yeah.
health infrastructure by the Israelis. And then the disease surveillance, those are cumulative numbers. So it just shows you all the cases. So even if something is resolved, the
Well, if it were
it never
resolved, we'd
goes
see it
down.
flat. We'd see it flatline, which
Right. But
is
it never goes down.
no,
That curve
no,
will
it
never
won't
go
go
down.
down.
Okay.
No.
Okay. The only other comment I wanted to make before you go on is I just want to shoot down some of your optimism about Erez and Cyprus being open because they open these things only to have something to close or threaten to close. So we remember they can always just close that again.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure, but it's not worse than it being closed before. It creates
Fair
at
enough.
least one other outlet.
For
You know,
however
I,
long.
for example, can't go in through Egypt, so
Yep.
it at least create, and I'm not the only one. There are lots of people like me who have burned bridges with Egypt one way or the other. And in fact, one of the things we've noticed in this crisis is that the most senior, experienced field doctors, people with experience in Gaza, aren't there, even though we all want to be there, and we just can't get in because variously, we're banned from this route or that route. And there's the gauntlet of having to go through the Israelis, the Palestinians, including the PA, and the Egyptians. I mean, it's a nearly impossible gauntlet.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I'm done. Those are my questions. You can go on.
yeah, so people have heard also about the attacks on healthcare. The attacks on healthcare and the lies that result from them are just so patent that here, I'll show you one example of a photo. Um, Okay, so this photo here basically was a report that the Israel or a photo compilation that the Israelis released. It's been modified, as I'll tell you in a sec, with these yellow and red squares. I'll explain them. The Israelis said these are all of the medical people at, I believe it was Shifa, who were involved in terrorist activities, ostensibly part of Hamas. And immediately, people picked out that almost none of these are healthcare workers. This is from Healthcare Worker Watch, excellent group. You can see their Twitter handle here. They've been doing remarkable work. Just today, actually, a few doctors were released from jail that have been in jail for months and months. And in this particular photo, what you can see is a few things. So basically, we've identified all of the medical personnel. They're the ones in red. There are also and there, by the way, there are 11 of them. So all we can identify in terms of medical people are these 11 out of this list of, first, they claimed it was 250, but there's only or 300 or something. There's only 250. I forget the exact numbers. The yellow are all repeats. So look at Q. So if you can see my mouse there, Q's here, but Q's also here.
So
And
it's like one of those memory games for kids.
yeah, 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 exactly. And this one, I can't tell if it's the boxes or not, but it's just ever so slightly scaled in. And so it's ever so slightly different, but like these are all more or less sort of the same people. On this list are, of course, in terms of the red, are people I know pretty well. I know this doctor pretty well. I know this doctor pretty well. This doctor here is a good friend, and he was the vice dean of the medical school. Working in Shifa, like, mad props to that guy. He was so high ranking within the medical system that he knew if the Israelis ever got a hold of him that he would be in trouble. and yet he was on duty when he got arrested. So it's really remarkable, and it just sort of shows too the Israelis have been trying to make a lot of the medical system being complicit. Of course, that's garbage, but
Yeah, I just want to say, sorry, I don't know. I saw this panel presented by pro-Israel people the when they first were, however deep into the siege of Shifa, the second big massacre at Shifa that they did. And I just thought, what is a panel of photographs supposed to prove? It's another one of these things where they can present a panel of photographs, which is not evidence by any standard in any venue, and everybody is just supposed to accept it. It's again the just continuous insulting of the intelligence of their own fans as well as all of the rest of us that characterizes their presentation. It almost feels like another mockery. Like, hey, this is how stupid we think you are. We're going to show you a panel, a grid of photos, like a memory game, and you're going to accept it as evidence that we were allowed, that justifies these genocidal acts of atrocity in this
yeah.
hospital.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, obviously 100%. Like, it's insulting to everybody involved. Um, However, it did seem to capture people's imagination, which is why I thought it was important
Yeah,
that
I'm
Healthcare
not.
Workers Watch, followed it up.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really significant that they spotted, like, here's again, we make the mistake of thinking the Israelis are impressive in terms of their
Hmm.
PR or
Yeah.
impressive in
Or
terms of anything.
intelligence gathering or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're absolutely not. And this is yet another example of that sort of disgusting work. I mentioned the medical point. So essentially, what's happened, without sort of underestimating the intelligence of your viewers here, everybody knows that the medical system has been attacked. However, the reaction is something that's not so obvious. So essentially, the Palestinians have realized that any fixed medical points are going to get attacked by the Israelis. And so one of the reactions to that is to make medical points that are relatively easy to tear down and to move. Functionally, this is in tents. So I'll show you one of these tents here. Um, Let me just share the screen again. So this one that's coming up is from the outside. See it right here. And you can kind of see that there's a medical tent that's being erected here. It's just a regular sort of tent that you might use at a trade show or something like that. This one is in Rafah. And the other tents that are coming up are similarly fashioned. So I'll show you what it looks like on the inside of one of these tents. And I'm using these photos from a Glia tent. Obviously we're doing the same thing as well. So it just sort of shows what one of them looks like. So this is kind of the inside of it as it's being set up before it has any patients in it. And for patient confidentiality reasons, I picked a photo to show you that has patients that are clearly not identifiable. So let me just show that to you as well. And essentially, this model of care is something that we've really been expanding on because it fights against. So here, if you can see that, it fights against one of the things that Israelis like to do, which is to attack medical points. And so, if we can degrade them quickly, move them, and move the people who are in them, and re-erect them wherever else they're needed, then you can provide care. Now, is this emergency care? No, even though there are some tents that are more elaborate. I won't show them because I think probably that puts them in danger. So there are essentially circus tent sized things that are between a clinic and a field hospital where you can provide more comprehensive care. But this one is one of the really relatively straightforward ones, which essentially serves as a medical dispensary and a referral center. So people come there and they're they sort of talk about their problem, and then you decide like, hey, is this something we can treat relatively quickly, or is this something that needs to go to someplace more comprehensive, like one of the circus tents or beyond? So that's an adaptation that we've been doing. Now, in terms of to kind of, did you want to ask any questions about that, Justin, or shall I
I
move
just
on?
had a kind of comment, which is it's almost like because the medical system has become a military target, the medical system has also had to become some kind of underground or guerrilla. You're doing guerrilla medicine in a sense now. So it's, I mean,
Yeah.
and I imagine these things are going to continue in the sense that they'll probably end up having hospitals underground in the tunnel network eventually. And yeah, it's going to be, these adaptations are going to continue as long as Israel is obsessed with attacking strictly civilian targets.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not involved in excuse me, in anything tunnel related, but I can tell you like all the reports are that there is a relatively unsophisticated medical system. I don't think that anybody expected that there would be a day where every medical place was a target. So I would be very surprised if the tunnels have anything more than sort of basic medical
Right.
points. But having said that, I imagine that in whatever next iteration exists, that'll probably be part of the case with maybe a simple OR or two somewhere
Mm-hmm.
along the way. And as you know, the fighters have what's called a military medical system. It's relatively well known. Every country, every group has it. The Canadian military has it. The American military has it. It's widely recognized as not a target because what they do is they're embedded, but they provide medical care,
Right.
and that's like essentially the entire reason, like raison d'être of the Red Cross
Right.
is to protect those people who are doing it,
Last
regardless.
last thing, just it's
Yeah.
something approaching a question, because I see a problem in the sense that how do people know that this tent has popped up? Is it just kind of you pop up in a neighborhood and then it's word of mouth and
Oh yeah.
people find out? Yeah.
Everybody knows right away. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This is not something that you could even hide if you wanted to. There's so little service provision that as soon as it happens, it's right there. Almost all of the doctors in Gaza right now are in Rafah. And so you have this very interesting situation where you have highly competent doctors who are en masse, but they're unwell, psychologically speaking, they're unwell, physically speaking, and they're ill-equipped. And so there is a role for international aid, but one of the first things that all of our green delegates will tell us is like, wow, I can't believe how many doctors they have. You know, for example, in one of the clinics where we work, there are 52 doctors and trainees. Like, yeah, that's a lot of doctors, but there's also 3,000 patients in a day. That's an awful lot of traffic for that one clinic. Nobody in Canada can imagine a clinic that processes 3,000 patients a day. I mean, it's insane. All of the hospitals and clinics in London probably don't process anything like 3,000 patients a day. It just isn't happening. So, you're totally right. Okay, so I also people are talking a lot about the coordination, especially vis-a-vis World Central Kitchen. So I wanted to show you uh, an example of how the coordination happens. So functionally, the way coordination runs is that we contact the Israelis and we tell them that we have a team that's going to be traveling at uh, 8 o'clock in the morning from point A to point B. And we tell them the route that we want them to take. The Israelis come back to us and generally will modify the route. We'll say, hey, that route is not appropriate for us. We want you to take the following route. So here's a screenshot of one of these routes. Essentially, I've disguised the originating point because I don't want to reveal where our team is based. The end point is European Gaza Hospital. Like, I don't think I need to disguise that. That's a huge center and destination. And so what you can see here is that they've put point B. That's the destination. Point A is somewhere off to the side in Rafah, which is where our team originated on this particular trip. And then if you see this halfway point here, this red sort of marker, by the way, this is all on Google Maps. They send us Google Maps to tell us what routes we can take. And this red point is where the team has to stop. So let's say our team's departure time is 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I call the Israelis. I say that our team is at the starting point agreed upon. Can you please give us a green light? And we wait. And sometimes they'll delay a green light by up to an hour, 2 hours. Sometimes they'll just cancel the whole trip. We usually find out if a trip is authorized the morning of. They're not like giving us authorization days in advance. And so it's not like they don't know the field conditions. For example, the last trip was authorized 3 minutes before the start time. So they basically know the conditions right away. And once it's authorized, then I tell them the vehicle is moving. So I have to submit the people who are in it, their mobile numbers, so that they can, because they like to track by mobile number, and the driver and the vehicle's markings, its license plate, all of that. There's no doubt that they know all of these things because we submit it. Obviously, no team in its right mind would ever let somebody who resembles an armed person in their vehicle. Like that's just crazy as an idea. But once they get going, then you call them to say, we have arrived at holding point 1. And then they make you wait, they clear it, and then they say, okay, you're clear to go from holding point 1. And then you travel. So here, really, holding point 1 to point B to the hospital is actually the dangerous part, which is probably why they make you hold. So once you're holding, they're checking the field condition again, and they're clearing it. World Central Kitchen would certainly have gone through this process, just like all of us. So, and then when you arrive at point B, then you tell them we've now arrived at point B, and then that ends the mission, unless there's a point C and a point D. Occasionally, it's a multi-destination place. This gets tricky because what happens along the route is that often there's communications jamming. So the Israelis, I mean, the Palestinians aren't communication jamming. The Israelis will communication jam. And so I can't get a hold of my driver or of my delegate. So they will then turn around and try to communicate with me but via satellite, except it's not like the Israelis jam the cell phones but won't jam the satellite. And so often when they're jamming the satellite signals, it'll take me an hour to receive a message, an hour to return a message to the satellite communicators that the delegates have. As I understand it, with WCK, they just jammed all their comms as well. They were able to make some communication. They were able to talk to the people who were leading them, who then communicated to the Israelis. Like you have somebody eye in the sky like I am, who's always aware of what's happening. And that person would have also known very quickly that something is wrong and would have very quickly communicated it to the Israelis very quickly to say to them, hey, like, something is wrong. So anyway, I thought this was probably worthwhile going through because it shows how under the gun we are, literally. And
so you're negotiating every step of your trip with the killers.
yeah. Yeah, and we
Very
had
interesting.
obviously we had a big discussion within our group about what to do afterwards. And really the
Sorry, something's just you're kind of breaking up, Tarek. Uh, I don't know
I
if
was just saying,
yeah,
is
you
this
said
better now?
yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. You said you reached the conclusion.
Yeah, so I mean, we reached the conclusion with our team that there's no way to stop intentional killing by the Israelis. What we're trying to avoid is a mistake. And obviously what happened with WCK was no mistake. Like they were being targeted. And once they're being targeted, I mean there's not much to do.
There's nothing,
Um
no force on earth that can save them. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. They're communicating. In fact, it's funny because the Palestinian reaction was like, why would you think they weren't trying to kill you? That happened, you should have run and hid because that's your only chance of surviving. but that road that they were on, there was nowhere really to run and hide
The
except in the
beach,
middle of,
basically, right? Is
yeah,
along the beach?
well,
Is
yeah,
it the
yeah,
yeah?
yeah. And it's cleared on like both sides. I mean, there's no way that they would have had any safe shelter. It must have been horrific, notwithstanding WCK's politics and concerns about them. Like on an individual level, it's horrific.
I remember you made a speech, um, I think in Ottawa, where you said, I don't want to go back to the conditions that predated this, but I mean, this is it's amazing how much military force is being applied against a medical system. I don't like my mind is repelled. I cannot fathom that this is happening, that you're using the kind of force you would use to fight an army and more or less ignoring the resistance that's attacking while they're doing that. It's very bizarre choices, but the medical, so that's the medical situation. And I guess I hate to prognosticate, but there's nothing improve. I mean, we're talking about the Erez crossing opening in Cyprus, but like we're trending downwards, right? All the hospitals have been destroyed at least once, and presumably they'll begin targeting whatever temporary fixes are. And when they attack Rafah, do you want to talk about what what the medical system if effect what effect on the medical system would be if and when they attack Rafah?
Yeah, so essentially right now, all of the medical services are concentrated in Rafah.
Mhm.
European Gaza Hospital is the only major hospital that has more or less been left unscathed. And so lots of the medical delegates are concentrated in European Gaza Hospital. It's not even conceivable to deliver care almost anywhere else. So, for example, when Glia first went into Gaza, we were tasked for Nasser Hospital. And just as we were entering Gaza, Nasser Hospital was getting taken over, and that part in which they were really going after it was happening. So obviously, we were tasked away to Rafah. And the same is happening. So the delegation after that was tasked al-Aqsa, and then there was an attack close by there, and then we were tasked down south with the attacks in Aqsa now. Really, of course, even though people want to help, people are also not used to the situation. So it's very, very difficult to put them into a place that's actively at war, like in Al-Aqsa or any of these other hospitals. Very small numbers of people are able to go there. And fundamentally, it's important for delegations to go to these places. A delegation finally made it to the northernmost areas, to Kamal Adwan. But that delegation is what consists of what, five, maybe 10 people. It's really not going to change the situation very much. So the doctors aren't the main thing that's needed. The main thing that's needed is a ceasefire. I was going to accentuate it with the F word, but I'm not sure you can do that on your podcast. So you, what's really needed is the ceasefire. And like you said, that downward trend, that's not something that can be undone by delegations coming in every 2 weeks. This last week was like the biggest delegation ever. It was 100 personnel. You're really not talking about big numbers, and definitely not anything that's capable of service delivery. Because let's say of these 100 people, 95 will leave at the end of 2 weeks, and then you have the same churn over and over again. And that first week is just getting your feet wet, getting ready. We obviously, everybody tries as much as possible to get these teams oriented, but it's impossible to replace the delivery. And you see it, like you see it in the numbers, just like you said. We're not compensating as international delegations. We're not compensating. It's it's important to realize also that the compensation that is happening is all indigenous. You mentioned that they basically turned into a guerrilla unit. Yeah, like I mean, anybody who is thinking about this will tell their doctors, don't ever come into contact with the Israelis except in civilian clothes. So at least you have a chance of getting away,
So it's
because they're,
covert. You're acting. You have to act as if you're covert doctors.
yeah, exactly. And some of the doctors will carry, some of the doctors no longer practice in scrubs because they feel like the Israelis are around the corner. They could come anytime. I don't want the Israelis are not around the corner. Like they're actually clumsy enough that they declare themselves well in advance.
Right.
So some of the doctors will change to civilian clothes when the Israelis are getting closer, just
Mm.
so that they can kind of not be the subject of attack. However, some doctors won't on principle. A lot of doctors have faith in the protection that the Hippocratic Oath gives them. One of those doctors, Dr. Muhammad Nunu, who's just a stand-up doctor and a wonderful gentleman. And when I heard he was killed, I was like, no, no, must be another Muhammad Nunu. But anyway, he was one of those doctors who believed so completely in the protection of the medical system that he kept serving his patients. And when the Israeli soldiers told him to cease and desist, he refused, thinking that his humanity was his shield. Um, and obviously, within the culture, this man is not senselessly killed. He sacrificed himself for a huge cause, and that cause is multiplied, not just the liberation of his nation, but also the certainty in the wholesomeness of the medical
Yeah.
profession and the medical calling.
Well, that's your medical sit rep, folks. Do you have anything to add, Tarek?
Yeah, I think for your viewers, a lot of people wonder how they can help. Any of your
Yeah.
medical viewers who are actually capable of doing medical work, come on a delegation. Especially, we're finding that people who have some political awareness of what's going on make much better delegates. They can dive in a little bit more and they do a little bit less harm. Naturally, delegations do harm in these scenarios. And so it's not about not doing any harm, it's about minimizing the amount of harm we do coming into these situations where we're aliens and we're coming into doctors who have been working, heroically for so long. So any of your medical personnel, especially those with some political understanding, volunteer. You can look us up. Our organization's called GLIA, but there's lots of excellent ones. If you're a medical person, we'll find you something to do.
Are there
Also, if
things they could do to get ready? Like things they should read or things they should, is there some way to get up to speed so that you're less helpless or less like a fish out of water when you get there?
No, you can't learn years or decades of political intuition through sort of a few weeks or a book or two. That takes time, and that's one of the things that we're finding too. Most organizations will spend a lot of time indoctrinating their delegates for months, literally. Like MSF takes 3 to 6 months. World Health Organization's a minimum of 3 months, and they try to train them because medical delegation work comes from such a position of privilege into a place of poverty. I mean that in the holistic sense: poverty of medical care, poverty of food, poverty of safety, that you can do a lot of harm very quickly. We don't have that luxury. We don't have the luxury of picking people and training them and indoctrinating them over time and how to best help. So it's nice to pick out people like probably viewers of your podcast or viewers of your sit-reps who have some understanding of the politics and are less likely to do damage once they get there. Because it's a unique situation. It's not like traveling, I do rural medicine in Canada. When you go rurally, there is similar ethical issues of how you practice and what you do. But at the end of the day, these are first world problems.
You don't
Whereas,
have a first world military destroying the system as you
yeah,
and murdering your colleagues as you try to
yeah,
work.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And
Oh,
everybody else, not just your colleagues, your patients.
your patience, yeah, of course.
And then the other thing, Justin, if I could say, is if people are willing to donate, right now the World Health Organization is doing what it can. They have never been so poorly tasked, I guess, so poorly enabled by the international community. For example, this is the first ever World Health Organization response that doesn't include any funding for any of the organizations, that's working with any random organization off the street to kind of deliver care. So if people are able to donate, then they should donate. Kalia has a donation page. So does every major medical organization, Medical Aid for Palestinians, PAMA, Palestinian American Medical Association, Mecca, Middle East Children's Alliance, HEAL, PRCS. Every organization is taking funds, and what we're doing is we're buying equipment, buying supplies, and taking them in our packs. So that's needed too.
Thank you very much. So yeah, the one I've always known about and followed is Medical Aid for Palestinians, and it's good to know they're still working. That's the one it's the first one that comes to mind since 2014 or before.
Yeah, you might have noticed in
Yeah.
terms of service delivery, they're like number 2 or number 3 after Anarwa. They're a massive operation, very, very impressive and competent because they really do mix the advocacy. They fully understand better than almost anybody else that you cannot solve this crisis. This is basically a political military crisis through a humanitarian lens. It's the wrong lens. You can't fix it
Yeah.
that way.
But you got to do it. And
Yeah. Yeah,
so
band-aids
here
are
we are.
important, even though
Yeah.
they're only band-aids.
All right. Thanks, Tarek. I don't know if we'll have you back to talk again, but everybody else, like and subscribe and hang in there. I think tomorrow Nasrallah is speaking, so that's one to watch for. We'll definitely be doing a report on that. All right, everybody, we'll see you in the next one.